We speak of death as if we know what it is. A line, a final wall, a silence that swallows everything. But do we? We have given it a name. We have given it masks, skulls, veils, black wings. We have wrapped it in robes of fear and ritual. We whisper its name in temples and hospitals, but the thing itself remains a shadow at the edge of thought. And yet every one of us walks toward that shadow. Every breath is a step. Every heartbeat is a drumbeat leading to that door. A door. Yes, that is closer to the truth than a wall. Because a wall ends. A door opens. But what does it open to? The myths give answers. Too many answers. The Egyptians spoke of the Duat, a labyrinth of rivers and judges and gates of fire. The Greeks spoke of the misty halls of Hades, where shades drift like smoke. The Norse sang of Valhalla, where the brave feast forever beneath a roof of spears. The Christians built heaven, with its golden streets and gates of pearl and hell, with its flames gnawing eternally at the marrow of the soul. So many maps, so many worlds sketched in the ink of faith. But maps are not the journey, and the afterlife has no ink. It has no words. Still, we cling to these visions. Why? Because we fear the unknown, because we dread the silence, because the mind would rather believe in fire and crowns than in a void without edge. But what if all these maps are only metaphors? What if the realms of the dead are not places but states, not geography but vibration, not a landscape beyond the stars, but a frequency just beyond the range of waking flesh? If so, then death is not a country we travel to. It is a shift, a turning of the inner wheel, a flicker of perception, and suddenly the familiar dissolves like frost under the breath of dawn. The door we call death, it does not close on life. It opens on something else, something vast, strange, and perhaps terribly beautiful. But here is the thought that troubles like a thorn. What if even that is not the end? What if the afterlife is not a destination, but a detour? A pause between movements in a symphony that began before you were born and will echo long after you forget this name, this body, this fleeting dream called you? If so, then everything we believe about death is wrong. It is not the full stop at the end of the sentence. It is a comma, a breath, a pivot in a story too immense for our minds to hold. The ancients knew this, not in the way of charts and proofs, but in the marrow of their myths. That is why they called death a crossing, a ferry, a bridge arched over black waters. Because deep down, they sensed what we have forgotten, that the road does not end in shadow. It bends, it spirals, it returns. And the question is not what waits beyond the door. The question is why we built the door at all. We close our eyes, and then what? The breath falls silent. The pulse is gone. The body cools and begins its slow return to dust. But what of the thing that looked through those eyes? The presence behind the pulse? Does it vanish like smoke in wind? Or does it walk on into another light? Every culture has asked this question, and every culture has answered in its own language of symbols and dreams. The Egyptians knew the path was not simple. They spoke of the Duat, a twilight labyrinth stretching beneath the skin of the world. There, the soul sails on black waters, guided by spells inked in gold. There are gates and guardians with faces of beasts. There are halls where hearts are weighed against feathers, too heavy, and you sink into the jaws of Ammit, the devourer of souls. Balanced, and you pass into the field of reeds where eternity shimmers like an endless dawn. Not a paradise of ease, but a kingdom of justice where truth is lighter than air and lies fall like stones into the abyss. The Greeks dreamed differently. They saw the river first dark as midnight, coiled like a serpent through the underworld. Styx, they called it. You cross it in the skiff of Charon, a ferryman whose eyes hold no light, whose hand waits for the coin beneath your tongue. On the far bank lies Hades, a land without sun, where shades drift like smoke and voices echo like broken lyres. For most, no torment, no bliss, only grayness. A hollow hush where even memory thins. Yet for a few, the heroes, the poets, there is Elysium, a meadow drenched in immortal light, where music never dies. Two paths, two fates, both born of the same death. The Norse saw a hall, high as the sky, its rafters hung with spears, its benches heavy with the weight of fallen kings. Valhalla, the feast that never ends, where warriors drink the blood of battles and rise each dawn to fight anew. But not all find this gate. Most wander Helheim, a realm not of flame, but of frost and stillness, where the dead wait under roots deeper than the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree that binds the 9 realms like beads on a string of shadow. The East drew subtler maps. The Tibetan sages whispered of Bardo, a space between breaths, a dream between deaths. There, visions blossom like storms, wild and dazzling, woven from the threads of your own mind. Gods rise, demons howl, but all are mirrors. See through them, and you step into liberation. Cling to them, and the wheel turns, and you are spun back into the hunger of another life. And in the deserts of Mesoamerica, they spoke of Mictlan 9 layers deep, a spiral of trials and shadows. The soul descends through rivers of obsidian, winds of knives, mountains that grind like the teeth of giants. Not punishment, but passage, a journey that scours the dust of mortality until what remains is pure enough to pass into the quiet halls beyond. Different lands, different names, but listen closely. Do you hear the echo, the pattern that hums beneath the symbols? No culture speaks of death as a wall. All speak of it as a road, a crossing, a bridge arched over the chasm of unknowing. And every map, no matter how strange, says the same thing. There is movement, there is becoming, there is something after. So where do we go? Perhaps nowhere, perhaps everywhere. Perhaps the question itself is flawed, because where is a word for bodies, and what walks through the door of death is not a body. Perhaps what moves is not a traveler, but a song, a note struck from the harp of the infinite, ringing in some deeper octave when this one fades. But the maps remain, and they are not maps of geography. They are maps of meaning, of states, of thresholds in the soul. And if we read them wisely, they tell us something vast, that what lies beyond is not a void, but a voyage. We live as if the line were real, as if life begins at birth, ends at death, and the space between is all there is. A line, straight, simple, comforting in its clarity, terrifying in its brevity. But what if that line is a lie? Think of the horizon. It looks like an end, a sharp edge where the world falls into nothing, and yet sail toward it and the edge recedes. There was no edge at all, only the curve of a circle, the illusion of a boundary where none exists. Time is like that. It curves, it coils, it spirals like the shells of forgotten seas. But we do not see the spiral. We see only the segment beneath our feet, and we call it a line. Why do we cling to the illusion of finality? Because it gives shape to the chaos. Because the mind fears what it cannot measure. It wants beginnings and endings, doors that shut and do not open, walls that keep the infinite out. And so we invent words like birth and death, as if they were absolutes, as if the soul obeyed the same laws as the bone. But the ancients knew better. They saw the wheel in the sky, the seasons turning like great cogs of light, the moon dying and returning, the sun sinking into darkness only to blaze again in dawn. They carved this truth into stone. Nothing ends. It only changes its name. The fear of death is the fear of change, the terror that what we know will be torn away and beyond it nothing. But what if that nothing is fullness? What if the door we dread is only a hinge in the arc of eternity, swinging wide to let the soul step into another octave of the same endless song? Look deeper at life itself. Does anything truly die? The leaf falls, and we call it death, but it melts into soil, feeds the root, becomes the tree again in another spring. The body burns, and we scatter the ash, but every atom goes on dancing, woven into wind, into water, into the breath of strangers not yet born. If matter obeys this law, why not the mystery that moves within it? The illusion of finality is not in death, it is in perception. We think in straight lines because we live in a world of walls and roads, but consciousness is not a road, it is a sea, and seas have no ends. They have tides, ebb and flow, arrival and retreat, movements so vast they seem like endings only to those who cannot see the whole. This is why the myths whisper of return, of rebirth, of cycles turning like wheels of fire across the sky. Not because poets love repetition, but because truth moves in circles. What was will be, what ends begins again, not in the same form, but in the same essence, like a melody modulating into another key. The afterlife, then, is not a terminus. It is an interval, a pause between breaths, a rest in the symphony, not its final note. And perhaps this is the greatest irony, that we spend our lives fleeing death, fearing its shadow, when death is not the enemy. It is the curve that keeps the circle whole. Without it, there is no movement. Without it, there is no return. And so the question is not, will it end? The question is, how far does the circle turn before we recognize ourselves again? We call it the afterlife, as if it were the prize at the end of the race, as if life were a narrow road and beyond the final bend waits the house of eternal rest. Heaven, hell, paradise, fields of light, endless night. We imagine permanence beyond the veil because the mind craves closure, an anchor in the storm of becoming. But what if that permanence is an illusion? What if the afterlife is not a destination, but a detour? Think of the road you walk in dreams. You wander through landscapes both strange and familiar, and every step feels real until you wake. Then the dream dissolves, and you realize it was only a passage, a corridor between sleep and waking. What if death is like that? Not the end of the journey, but a shimmering threshold, a passage between two vastnesses, what was and what will be. The ancients hinted at this. The sages of the East spoke of Bardo, the in-between state, where visions bloom like flowers of fire, beautiful, terrible, woven from the threads of your own mind. They said, "These are not your home. They are mirrors. Pass through them, and you will wake again in the wheel of life or step beyond it, if you dare to let go of every dream." The Greeks knew it too, in their myth of Lethe, the river of forgetting. The dead drink from it before they return to the earth, their memories drowned, their identities unstitched, ready to weave a new pattern on the loom of time. Even in the West, the promise of heaven trembles with an unspoken truth, that eternal stasis is not bliss, but annihilation. To live is to move, to be is to become, And if becoming ceases, so does being. The afterlife as a detour. What does that mean? It means the soul does not stop. It cannot. It moves like a river through worlds, curving, branching, vanishing into caverns of shadow, only to surge again in the light of another dawn. What we call heaven, what we call hell, are bends in that river, eddies where the current lingers for a season, for a span of what feels like eternity, because outside of time, a moment can taste like a millennium. But sooner or later, the current stirs, the dream loosens, and the soul moves on. Why? Because the afterlife is not the goal. It is the garden on the roadside, the inn at the edge of the desert, a place to rest, to shed the dust of one incarnation, to gather the fragments of self scattered by the winds of living. It is the place where you remember for a breath, for a blazing instant, that you were never the mask you wore, never the name you clung to. And then you choose. Will you dive back into the spiral of time, take on another mask, walk another dream? Or will you step beyond the wheel into the silence that has no edge, no form, no return? Few choose the silence. Most turn back, not because they are weak, but because the song of form is sweet, and the dance of worlds is hard to leave behind. This is why the sages said, "Death is not the end, it is the bending of the road." And perhaps this is why the myths are filled with gates, bridges, ferries sliding over black rivers, because the soul is always crossing, never arriving. If the afterlife is a detour, what does that make life? Not the destination either, not the straight road we imagine, but a curve within a greater curve, a single note in an endless symphony. And here is the paradox. We fear death because we mistake it for an end. But if we saw it for what it is, a passage, a pause, a shimmering dream between two awakenings, the fear would dissolve like mist in morning light. Then what would remain? Not terror, but wonder. Not dread, but the quiet awe of a traveler standing before a door that does not close, but opens and opens and opens into worlds without number. So do not cling to the word afterlife as if it promised permanence. There is no after, there is no final. There is only the turning, the flowing, the infinite detour through the garden of stars. We enter this world like actors stepping onto a stage, and we do not remember the script we wrote. We do not recall the roles we played before. The curtain of birth falls heavy, and behind it, the echoes fade. Why? Why this forgetting? Why this strange amnesia that erases the long road behind us and blinds us to the path ahead? Some call it mercy, others call it design. Imagine if you carried every face you have worn, every grief you have endured, every blade you have plunged and felt. Would you bear it? Could you breathe beneath that weight? The soul might be eternal, but the mind is fragile. Perhaps forgetting is the shield that keeps the mind from breaking. The ancients hinted at this in symbols. The Greeks spoke of Lethe, the river of forgetting that winds through the underworld. The dead drink from its waters before they are born again, and in that draught, their memories dissolve like ink in rain. Why? Because to return, you must forget. To play a new role, you must lay aside the mask of the old. If you remembered every costume, every scene, would you ever step onto the stage? But the forgetting is not perfect. Sometimes the veil thins. In dreams, in flashes, in the strange déjà vu that coils around a moment and whispers, "I have walked this road before." A child stares at the sea and weeps, though they have never seen the ocean. Another picks up an instrument and plays like a ghost of Mozart returned. What explains this? Chance? Or the slow leak of memory through the cracks in the dam of time? Modern tongues call it past life recall, Science shrugs. It files the evidence in cabinets marked coincidence and fantasy. But the stories persist. A child in Burma who knows the name of a man long dead. A boy in America who recalls a cockpit in flames over the Pacific. Thousands of cases, whispers of an archive we pretend does not exist. And what of the voices of the dying, those who drift to the edge and return? They speak of corridors of light, of faces waiting beyond the dark, of landscapes more real than waking life. Then they wake, and the edges blur. The memory melts like frost in sun. If memory fades, does that mean it is lost? Number, it sinks deeper. Like a stone dropped into a still lake, its ripples vanish on the surface, but the weight remains at the bottom. And sometimes, when the waters are clear, you can see its shadow in the depths. So why this design? Why scatter the pages of the book and force the soul to read one at a time, forgetting the chapters behind? Because the story is not for the mind, it is for the marrow of being. It is not what you remember, it is what you become. If you carried the full archive, you would cling to it. You would live backward. You would wear the mask of the old role and never enter the new. Forgetting is freedom. Forgetting lets you step naked into the fire of another life and burn into a new shape. But here is the paradox. Forgetting does not erase. It hides, and beneath the hiding, everything waits. The loves you lost, the vows you broke, the temples you built and toppled, they are all in you, folded like roots in the dark soil of the soul. And sometimes a root breaks the surface. In a dream, in a scent, in a moment when the world tilts and you remember not in words, but in a shiver that whispers, I have been here before, I will be here again. The afterlife too is swallowed in this forgetting. Those luminous halls, those rivers of light, those meetings with the dead all fade when you return. Why? Because life demands focus. If you remembered the sweetness of that realm, would you not claw at this world like a prisoner in chains, yearning to escape? Would you live the lesson you came to learn? The veil protects you from longing as much as from grief. It binds you to the moment, to the taste of this bread, the heat of this sun, the ache of this loss, because these are the tools of transformation. And so the wheel turns, and the forgetting falls, and the soul walks on, dreaming it is a body, dreaming it is a name, until the curtain lifts again, and the long memory floods like dawn across the hills of eternity. They say the dead are silent, that when the last breath falls like ash and the eyes close, all words end. But is that true? Stand in an empty room where someone you loved once laughed and listen. Do you not feel it? That hush thick with presence, that weight like a hand pressing softly on your shoulder. Silence is not absence. Silence is another language, and the dead speak it fluently. Every culture knew this. The Greeks poured wine for their ancestors, calling their names in whispers. The Romans left offerings at the hearth for the shades who hovered at the edge of firelight. The Egyptians built temples of stone so the dead might breathe through ritual and sip eternity from the chalice of memory. And the East, they burned incense, folded prayers into smoke, because smoke rises and perhaps carries words where tongues cannot go. Why such rites spun across millennia, woven through every faith? Because all sense the same truth. The dead do not vanish. They linger like twilight, hovering in the half-light between here and elsewhere. But what of now, in this age of iron and wires, where the sacred is drowned in noise? Do the voices still speak? Yes, only softer, only stranger. Listen to the myths first. They tell of kings who sought counsel from the underworld, of prophets who heard whispers in the dark, Odysseus pouring black blood into the earth so the dead might drink and speak, Saul calling Samuel from his grave through the mouth of a trembling witch, not superstition, symbol. Because every myth is a mask of something real, and beneath these masks, a pattern hums, communication across the threshold. Then there are the stories modern tongues try to silence. The soldier who hears his mother's voice as bullets stitch the air, lie down. He obeys. The bullet misses. He lives. Later, he learns. She died that morning. The woman who smells her father's pipe smoke the night she gives birth. Though the house is sealed and empty, the child who wakes screaming a name no one taught him, and that name belongs to a brother dead before he was born. Coincidence? Skeptics hiss the word like a spell to banish fear. But how many coincidences make a truth? And then there are the edges of death, where the veil thins and the voices surge like a tide. Near death. They call it that, as if almost dying were a clinical event to be charted and filed. But ask those who returned. They speak of tunnels lit with a brilliance that burns without flame, of presences waiting beyond the bend of light, of voices not heard but known, pouring meaning into the marrow of the soul. Not yet, they say. Go back. And so they do, stumbling into their bodies like divers breaking the surface gasping, haunted by a sweetness they cannot name and a certainty they cannot prove, that death is not silence but a dialogue. Mediums, seances, the table raps, the letters scrawl across paper, guided by unseen hands. Fraud? Often, but not always. Even Houdini, scourge of charlatans, died whispering a code to his wife. See if I speak. He did not, or so they say. But perhaps the voices do not shout. Perhaps they murmur in dreams, in the flicker of a candle that gutters without wind, in the chill that strokes your spine when you pass the place where someone you loved once breathed. Why does this matter? Because it tears a hole in the illusion of finality, because it hints that the self does not drown in the dark, that something remains not just as memory in other minds, but as presence, as pulse, as whisper, and perhaps more. Perhaps the dead are not behind us at all. Perhaps they walk ahead, their lanterns glowing in a corridor. We will enter when the last heartbeat falters like a tired drum. The voices of the dead are not proof. They are invitation. Invitation to listen, to loosen the chains of certainty, to admit that the road does not end where the map does. Because if you listen long enough, in the hush between breaths, in the murmur of leaves, in the dream that clings like cobweb at dawn, you may hear it not in words, but in the deep tongue of silence. We are not gone. We are the wind at your back. Walk on. We were told to look upward, to imagine gates of pearl, streets of gold, a throne blazing like a diamond in the endless blue. We were told this is heaven, a country of light where pain cannot follow, where every tear will be erased like chalk from a board. And for hell a pit, a furnace roaring under the roots of the world, where fire licks the bones of the damned forever. These images burned into us like brands. They shaped the prayers of centuries. They built cathedrals and crusades. They drew maps of eternity on the walls of the finite. But here is the whisper that turns those maps to dust. These places do not exist. Not as geography, not as real estate for souls. The saints knew this, though the masses could not bear it. Origen warned, those who cling to the letter kill the spirit. Augustine murmured that the fires of hell were not of matter, but of mind. Even Paul said it plain, the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. What does that mean? It means the sacred text is written in a tongue older than words, the language of symbol. And to read it literally is to stare at the shell and never taste the fruit. Heaven and hell are not places. They are states. They are the weather of the soul. Think, have you not tasted both already? The heaven of a moment when love fills you like sunlight spilling through broken glass, when time thins and every breath hums with eternity. The hell of a night when grief burns like acid in your veins, when the mind loops its own torment like a wheel of fire. Do you need gates of pearl for that? Do you need pits of flame? Number, because these are not landscapes, they are frequencies, dimensions of consciousness that unfold not after death, but now in the inner architecture of your being. But why the imagery? Why the stories of thrones and rivers of crystal? Because symbol is the only bridge between the infinite and the finite. Because truth too vast for thought must wear a mask or blind the mind like staring into the sun. So the sages wrapped states in symbols. They clothed vibrations in visions of gardens and flames, of crowns and chains, so the child soul of man could taste the edge of what cannot be spoken. But then came the error. We took the mask for the face. We clung to the picture, forgetting it was a window. We mistook the metaphor for the map, and the map for the country. And so heaven became a promise to buy with obedience, and hell a cudgel to beat the living into fear. The tragedy of literalism is this. It chains the infinite to bricks and borders. It freezes the river of meaning into dogma's ice. It turns the symphony into a single note played too loud and too long. But peel back the letter, and the spirit hums like a buried sun. The mystics knew. They said, "The kingdom of heaven is within you, not above the clouds, not in some far-off Eden, but here in the marrow of your now, in the still point beneath the storm of thought, where the soul burns without flame and drinks from a river that is not water but pure awareness." And hell? Also here, in the labyrinth of craving, in the furnace of hate, in the loops of fear, we forge ourselves. No demon is needed. We are architect and prisoner both. So, what happens when we die? Do we float to gardens or fall into fire? Number, we slip deeper into the patterns we have woven. We wake in the world that mirrors the shape of our own mind. If we lived in love, we rise into fields of its fragrance. If we fed on bitterness, we drown in its bitter sea until the lesson burns clear and the wheel turns again. Literal heaven is a cage of gold. Literal hell is a scarecrow of smoke. Both blind us to the truth that eternity is not a destination, but a dimension that flowers through us whenever we open the eye behind the eyes. The maps were never wrong, only our reading of them. They were not blueprints of places, but diagrams of states, songs teaching the soul to tune itself to the higher octave of its own being. And perhaps when the last fear of fire and throne falls away, you will hear the music again. And in that music, you will know you were never promised a garden. You were promised yourself, unbound, unbroken, burning like a sun in the heart of the infinite. What is the journey for? What is the point of all these crossings, birth and death, worlds and thresholds, doors that open into light and shadow? We imagine an end, a final shore where all roads meet, where we can rest, where becoming ceases and being blooms eternal. But what if there is no such shore? What if the sea is endless and the horizon only a mirage painted by the hunger of the heart for certainty? Would that frighten you, or would it set you free? The afterlife was never home. It was a resting place, a quiet inn on the long road through forever, a pause between storms where the soul unlaces its boots, washes the dust of time from its brow, and remembers for a breath that it is not the mask it wore, not the name it clung to. But the pause is brief, because something in us, call it spirit, call it the hunger of the infinite for its own reflection, cannot linger. It leans forward, it aches to move. And so the wheel turns, and the path bends, and we are called again. Returning to the path means this: you will walk again, not because you failed, not because you sinned, but because the play is not done, the music not finished, the canvas not yet drenched in all the colors you came to pour upon it. The soul is not a prisoner of time, it is an artist, and time is its brush. Each life a stroke, each death a pause to step back and see the shape emerging from the silence. And when the picture is done, if it is ever done, you will lay down the brush, not in despair, in wonder, because the art was never the goal. The art was you, becoming, breaking, burning into new arting. Forms until form itself falls away, like petals from a flower too vast for any garden. The mystics whispered this long ago: you are not in the world is in you. And if that is true, then the road is not out there, paved in dust and stars. It spirals inward, through chambers of memory, through oceans of silence, toward a center that is not a point, but a presence without edge. And when you reach it, if reaching can even be spoken, you will laugh, because the thing you sought was never ahead. It was the light in your own marrow, singing through every life like a hidden chord. But why this detour? Why all these worlds and veils? Because the infinite hides from itself so it can taste the sweetness of discovery. Because the one fractures into a billion masks to learn the joy of reunion. Because being without becoming is silence without song. And so it dreams. It dreams as you. It dreams as me. It dreams as every face that will ever look into the mirror of existence and whisper, "Who am I?" What waits beyond the door we call death? Not a throne, not a cage of clouds, not an ending, a bend, a curve in a road too vast for maps. You will walk it. You have walked it before, and one day, when the wheel has turned through more dawns than there are stars, you will stand on the last hill and see that the road was never many roads, but one. And it was not leading anywhere. It was circling a fire so bright that even now it burns in the hollow of your chest. So fear not the detour. Fear not the forgetting. Fear only the sleep that blinds you to the truth that every step, every life, every death is the dance of the infinite trying on your face. And when the music ends, if it ends, it will end not in silence, but in a note so vast it becomes the song of all that ever was, all that ever will be. And in that note, you will know there was no road, no door, no detour, only the endless returning to the heart that dreamed you from the beginning.